Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Last week we noted that it seems a little strange, a little odd, that former CIA Director John Brennan still has a high-level security clearance. He doesn't work for the government anymore. He's a cable news yapper who spends a lot of his life yelling at people on Twitter. Brennan is also a political extremist who, if you listen carefully, seems unbalanced. If John Brennan gets a security clearance, then why not the homeless guy talking to himself on the bus? That seemed like a fair question. Apparently, the White House agreed with that. Yesterday, the administration announced it is seeking to revoke security clearances for John Brennan, Jim Clapper, and other former officials who no longer work for the government. Because, honestly, why would they have security clearances? In a normal year, that would not be a very big story, but things are not normal right now. So here's how the geniuses on cable news reacted. Watch.
This is an abuse of executive power. This is Erdogan's Turkey.
That is exactly what you see in authoritarian regimes.
It's childish. It's petty.
This is so extraordinary. The last thing you want in intelligence is partisanship.
That he would turn against them in a way that obviously disrespects civil liberties, disrespects free press, is an autocratic kind of move. It's the kind of thing you'd see in a banana republic.
Autocratic. First they came for John Brennan's security clearance, and I said nothing. Barf. Next time you hear some blowhard on television warning about creeping authoritarianism, ask yourself, am I for unfettered free speech? Of course you are. You're an American. That is your birthright and the foundation of all other liberties. Then ask yourself a second question. How about the guy on television lecturing us about authoritarianism? Is he for unfettered free speech? No chance. He considers your opinions hate speech, which is a made-up category designed to gut the First Amendment and shut you up. He'd happily support big tech firms and college administrators and your company's HR department as they punish you for saying what you think is true. Creeping authoritarianism? It's already here, and that guy is the face of it. Lou Dobbs, by contrast, hosts Lou Dobbs Tonight on Fox Business, and he joins us tonight. Lou, what do you make of this controversy? I can't remember a weirder one. I was not aware that John Brennan had a moral right to a security clearance in perpetuity. Were you?
His ascendancy to the moral high ground caught me by surprise, too. This is the man who CIA spied on the Senate Intelligence Committee, who lied about spying on the Senate Intelligence Committee. It is extraordinary that this man has challenged, insulted, and degraded the presidency throughout the past year, and now would object to having his security clearance lifted. Tucker, I can't imagine why any one of those people retained a security clearance. They are of absolutely no use to any of them unless they're monetizing it, as Senator Rand Paul has said. And I thought, frankly, your discussion with Rand Paul hit exactly the right note in questioning the existence of security clearance for former officials, period, for any reason.
Well, I mean, he's a cable news yapper. He's a consultant to cable news, and so is Jim Clapper. And they have the highest level security clearances. And it raises the question then, like, why don't I have one? Or why don't you have one? I mean, what could possibly be the justification for that?
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm holding out for subpoena power. I would much prefer subpoena power. You get the clearance, we'll have lunch and go from there. I think this is just an absurdity that it exists at all. Think about Clapper and the quality of people that were in the Obama intelligence, leading the intelligence community under President Obama. Clapper, I will leave Michael Rogers, the head of the NSA, out of this. He is a sterling quality individual. But Clapper and Brennan and Comey, are you kidding me? Why in the world would they have security clearances?
And then you see these former liberals in good standing defending this, and it makes you realize that whatever Trump is for, they're against, and vice versa. So it's very easy to bait them. All of a sudden, they're for MS-13, and they're for, acting in porn movies as a noble profession, and they're for demented former CIA directors having security clearances. I mean, how easy would it be to get them to take totally insane positions just by telling them that Trump is against it?
Well, I don't think it would be difficult, as you point out, at all. Think about the positions that Clapper has taken, the lies that he has told. Comey, who's misrepresented at the very least so much. He talked about President Trump as a man who is nefarious, but this is a man he was perfectly willing to serve as his FBI director. And the list goes on. The madness and the intrigue here is overwhelming, I suspect, to most Americans. Because first, they didn't know that these people had security clearances still. They didn't understand why they got them in the first place and ascended to the top of their agencies. And the fact is, whether it's the FBI, the CIA, the DNI, what were their great accomplishments and achievements in leading the intelligence community? Was it to,
exactly.
It's the history of the intelligence community over the past 20 years is a sad and sorry tale.
If I worked in the White House, I would convene a month-long symposium against human trafficking just to watch Morning Joe convene a panel in favor of it. I think it would be hilarious.
I will endorse that idea. I think that's a lovely idea.
Amen. Great to see you.
Great to see you, Tucker.
Buck Sexton is a former CIA analyst. He worked with the NYPD's Intel Division. He joins us tonight. So, you've worked in this world, Buck. You have a better sense of this. Does this apply across all government agencies? If I'm a rifleman in the Marine Corps, do I get to keep my rifle at the end? Or if I work in artillery, do I get to keep my howitzer when I leave? Is this kind of the way it works?
There's specific law with regard to clearances, and there's also customs, Tucker. And when you're talking about former agency heads, they tend to keep them in a way that run-of-the-mill employees like me don't. And they also have, as a courtesy, they'd say, the ability to go back in and still have real-time access to classified information if, in fact, they were called in for that. That's the justification for this. But I feel like this whole debate just highlights a much bigger problem, a much more nefarious issue, and that is we have all these people lecturing us about institutions being undermined, and look what's happened to us, and the hacking of our democracy, and this can't be allowed to happen. We have the former intel chiefs of the biggest agencies of the United States government, the most sophisticated intelligence apparatus on the planet, who are actively trying to undermine now the sitting president of the United States. And they weren't the intel chief 10 or 20 years ago. They were the most recent one. What that means is that every time you've got Clapper or Brennan or others who are going on air talking about, for example, the Russia collusion case, there is at least some perception. And by the way, I think some of them have tried to enhance this with what they've said. They've danced around this, that they're drawing upon their classified knowledge to make some of these assumptions, right? They have extra gravitas. They should be paid attention to more because they're the most recent NSA or CIA director. That is insidious. I mean, this is deeply destructive to the faith that any future president could have in the previous administration's appointees at that level. And that's something that I think does not get talked about enough at all here.
No, I think it's a very wise point. And remind us again the point of having all these various alphabet agencies, all the intel apparatus exists only to serve the executive and to help him or her make wise foreign policy decisions, correct? Is there some other reason to have a CIA?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of agencies, 17 now, I think, technically in the intel community, though someone's probably going to correct me on that one, because it's actually grown since I was in it, so that will tell you something. It wasn't that long ago. But they exist. They exist to give for national security purposes. They would tell you what all the different specific missions are. But yes, they're executive branch agencies, and that then brings us to they should be serving the executive branch. And the same way that liberals, Tucker, don't really accept that President Trump is the president and therefore could fire Comey for no reason or any reason. If he wants to revoke clearances under his Article 2 authority, he can do that. So all of this freak out you're seeing from people is a form of Trump derangement syndrome on display for an issue that, by the way, most of these journalists have no idea what they're talking about. They've never held a clearance. They don't know what goes into this, and they don't know why anyone has one anyway.
Also, they're dumb. I mean, if Trump's an authoritarian, he's a pretty inefficient one. I mean, if Brennan and Clapper still have clearances a year and a half in, it's not much of a police state, I would say. Buck Sexton, great to see you.
Good to see you, Tucker. Thanks.
Well, they're inflamed over on the left, and tempers do not appear to be cooling. Over this weekend, the Denver Post published a letter to the editor suggesting that Trump and other members of the administration literally deserve to be executed for treason. Well, as we do so very often, things get completely nuts. We bring in some perspective. Fox's senior political analyst, Brit Hume, has seen everything, and therefore he can put this in the appropriate context and calm us down. Brit, great to see you.
Thank you, Tucker. Nice to see you.
What do you make of this?
Well, I went and read the letter, and it basically references Trump as some kind of traitor and notes that the Rosenbergs, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, were found guilty of that and says the letter they were executed. I didn't quite see this as a suggestion that Trump be executed, but it was, it was close to the line, and you might have thought the editors at the Denver Post would have been more careful about publishing it. But if we weren't here talking about it tonight, I don't think the world would longer than a few minutes even note that it ever happened. So I think it's probably much ado about not much.
But it raises the larger question, which is, and correctly, that treason is a death penalty offense, and the Rosenbergs were indeed executed for it at Sing Sing. And if you accuse someone of that in public, particularly if you're an elected official, you're making a pretty stout charge.
You are. Well, this is the thing about this is, and it came up in your previous segment when you're talking about John Brennan, who openly accused the president of treason. We now inhabit an age of exaggeration. Everybody goes to battle stations and to DEFCON 1 over everything. So it is not enough to say that Trump unwisely sided with Putin for a period of time against the intelligence. No, it's treason, and he's a traitor. And on the other side, of course, everybody is said to be corrupt, and there's no reasoned discussion going on right now. Everybody on all sides goes completely berserk, hair on fire over everything, and on it goes. Right now, there is a battle royal raging in Washington over the interpretation of the materials, the FISA application materials released at the end of the last week, as to their interpretation. Some journalists are writing, after reviewing them, that they support the conclusions reached by Devin Nunes in the House Intelligence Committee. Others are saying that that's all a lie, that it doesn't support that at all. I've never seen such diametrically opposed interpretations, and it's all at the highest possible decibel level, like nothing I've ever seen before.
So what would happen if there was an actual crisis, if there was an attack by a foreign power, physical, it's an actual attack, not a metaphorical one, and we found ourselves at war? How would a country this divided prosecute a war?
Well, it would be entirely up to the government itself, because I'm sure that the president's critics would interpret anything as he did as a kind of wag the dog scenario, and then believe that it was false, and the intelligence had reported it was false, and so on. And nobody trusts anybody. And that extends to the Congress. It extends to the media. The competition among media outlets is more intense than I've ever seen it. And all media outlets criticize all other media outlets. Professional courtesy about that is all but gone. And we inhabit an age where everybody is at the ramparts over everything all day, every day.
I've noticed that. Brit Hume, remaining calm despite all of it. Thank you very much for that.
Thanks, Tucker.
Bernie Sanders lost the 2016 Democratic primary, probably for not entirely legitimate reasons. But democratic socialism, which is what he ran on, appears to be taking over his party, irony of ironies. What is it exactly? We'll talk to one of the architects of the Bernie Sanders 2016 presidential campaign. Coming up. Democratic socialism has, for the last 100 years, been pretty much a fringe belief, even on the left. Now, open socialists are all of a sudden running for office across the United States, and they are winning Democratic primaries. Today on The View, Joy Behar started an argument when she declared her support for this ideology. Here's part of it.
On your tax form, I think you should start paying the amount of taxes that every socialist in this country thinks you need to.
They have just given this enormous tax break to the very, very wealthy in this country. That tax break doesn't have to be so generous to those really rich people, does it? Because if you don't give that money to them, what happens to that money? Better schools, better post office, better garbage pickup, better police departments, better fire departments.
The government is so good at running things, then the post office is a great run business.
One more word.
The VA, some of us do not want socialism to be normalized in this country.
I am an example. Can I finish
will be
70%
right. Behar did not release her own tax return, so we could see how many deductions she took. We're awaiting that. Meanwhile, Jeff Weaver managed Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign. He's the author of the book, How Bernie Won, Inside the Revolution that is Taking Back Our Country and Where We Go From Here. Jeff Weaver joins us tonight. Jeff, thanks a lot for coming on.
Hey, Tucker, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
So you just did an interview and were asked basically, what is this creed? What is democratic socialism? And you described basically a series of economic beliefs. Here's what you said. People want economic security. They want health care. They want dignity in old age. They want to know that they're not going to die with nothing. All pretty reasonable sounding ideas. When I listen to and you know how we pay for them is the point, but we could debate that. But those aren't bad ideas. When I hear modern Democrats talking, it is never about economics. It is about abortion. It is overwhelmingly about immigration and why we need to let people stay here, whether they're legal or not. It is nothing about an agenda of empowering the middle class economically. Why is that?
Well, let me tell you, Tucker, I think Democrats have to start walking and chewing gum at the same time. We do have to talk about the plight of marginalized communities in this country who have been targeted, especially by the president during his administration. But we also have to talk about the economic needs of people in every zip code in this country. You know, wages are stagnant. People are anxious about their futures, about their kids' futures, about taking care of their aging parents, about affording college. And we have to talk about all of these issues, frankly. And I agree with you that we need to hear more conversation.
But there's only But there's only so much time in the day. There's only so much attention. There's really only so much our system can digest. And if your fixation is with esoteric sexual politics like transgender bathrooms
or
global
plastic straws
warming
on Fox, I mean, I was just watching how many shows on plastic straws are you going to have here on Fox? I mean, how relevant is that to people's lives?
We did one. We do a lot of segments on economics because I think it's really important. So, like the elites of your party,
I would not call that a core economic issue, Tucker.
Well, I wouldn't either. No. Yeah. Well, I'm not claiming it was. We do a lot of segments on core economic issues, including this one. But I'm just interested, like your elites never say anything about how inviting millions of poor people into the country every year might depress wages for the working class.
Well, we're not talking about inviting in millions of people. The truth of the matter is that we do have millions of people in this country living in the shadows who are working hard. Many of them, in fact, are paying taxes. Their kids are in schools. They're contributing to our country. And I think we have to recognize that reality. That's for sure. But let's talk about the core economic issues. You wanted to talk about the quote-unquote democratic socialism. I know people on Fox love the scary labels and the red baiting, but let's talk about what that means. Overwhelmingly
well, hold on, wait, stop. I'm actually giving you the fairest possible shake you would get on any channel ever. I'm taking your ideas seriously. I'm not mocking you. Sure. I just am wondering if your ideas aren't on a collision course with the agenda set by the elites in your party. And you know as well as I do, the answer is yes. They're incompatible. What you're saying is not compatible with what they're saying, and you know it.
What I am saying is that we need a Democratic Party in this country, and we need a government in this country that represents the needs of ordinary people, and that includes an agenda that guarantees health care to all people, that pays people a living wage, that pays equally whether you're a man or a woman, that protects our environment, that gives people opportunity to go to college and to have a good life. That's what I'm talking about. People not retiring in poverty, destroying Social Security. These are the things that people are talking about in the progressive movement. And frankly, Tucker, if you look at the polling, it's wildly popular.
No, but they're not talking. But I agree with a lot of what you just said. What you said that is not true at all is that that's what they're talking about. They're not. They're talking about race. They're talking about sex. They're talking about identity politics. They're attacking people because of their skin color. I mean, I do this for a living. I know exactly what they're saying.
Well, let's
and
not talk about people attacking people with their skin color, because I think we go right to the White House where that starts, frankly, my friend.
But let's be real. I mean, honestly, every time I talk to progressive, it's like, oh, white man, this. It's like, what does that have to do with empowering the average person economically, which is what the agenda ought to be?
We have got to empower people of all races in this country, frankly.
Exactly.
And you cannot ignore the intersection of race and gender and other things. I mean, you're a smart guy. I'm not on Hannity here. This is a real show. And, you can't ignore those. You can't ignore those issues. But you are right.
I'm not ignoring the issues, but the children in your party who are clearly in charge are all about. I mean, do you personally, as a pretty serious guy, I guess a serious guy, get a little tired of having to follow like inflamed upper middle class college students who are constantly yelping about identity politics. Don't you think that's kind of a distraction from like the adult issues, or no?
Well, no, I think you're creating a false dichotomy here. There are important issues that are both issues of identity, and there are important issues of economics. And I think we have to speak to both. And people in the Democratic Party who advocate just one or the other, I'm constantly in conflict with those people who think that we only have to talk about one side of this, two-sided coin. We have to talk about these important issues that affect marginalized communities, and we have to talk about laying out an economic agenda that is going to uplift people of all races in every zip code in this country. That's the mission in front of us. And if you look at Bernie Sanders' historic campaign in 2016, he overwhelmingly won independent voters in the Democratic primary process, including in places that were very, very red, because folks understood that he was standing with their families in their everyday struggles. And that's what we as Democrats and progressives have to do.
I'm kind of aware of that. I just think, here's where I disagree with you, we got to go, but I would just say in one sentence, I think the identity politics people are beating you. And I hope I'm wrong.
Well, I think anyway, with Jeff, people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and others, we're winning.
I think she's on the identity politics side. But come back. We can talk about it. Sorry, we're out of time. Jeff Weaver, thank you. Well, it's not getting a ton of attention, but we seem to be moving incrementally toward war with Iran. Maybe we should talk about it first. Is it a good idea? We'll take an in-depth look at that next. We have some real news. The United States is inching closer, apparently, to some kind of conflict with Iran. This Sunday, the president tweeted this, quote, to Iranian President Rouhani, never ever threaten the United States again or you will suffer the consequences, the likes of which few throughout history have ever suffered before. We are no longer a country that will stand for your demented words of violence and death. Be cautious, exclamation point. Well, the interesting thing about this tweet is what didn't happen. The press is usually quick to jump on the president's intemperate tweets. CNN has apparently an entire team of progressive teenagers devoted to monitoring his feed. But this time, there wasn't much comment from the media. Why? Because if there's one thing Washington loves more than open borders and fat lobbying contracts, it's pointless wars half a world away. Contractors get rich, neocon intellectuals feel powerful. Bill Kristol, Max Boot, and Nancy Pelosi agree on one thing. War is good as long as the war does not help the United States. John Bolton finds himself in that camp. A lifelong neocon, Bolton repeatedly has called for toppling the Iranian government again and again, though tellingly he's never suggested what might replace the Iranian government once it's toppled. Now, the national security advisor, he has been changing our policies. The U.S., for example, has begun promoting protests within Iran in an effort to overthrow the regime there. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo appears to be aboard with this. UN Ambassador Nikki Haley definitely is. Here's a recent sampling of her saber rattling on Iran. Watch.
Their government has a long history of murdering its own people who dare to speak the truth. The Iranian regime is now on notice. The world will be watching what you do.
If you want to come to the table and work on a new Iran deal, we'll be right there to talk to you. But you're not going to threaten us to do it.
Iran may have messed with the wrong president here.
They absolutely did.
Now, some of that is bluster, obviously, but some of it is exactly what it looks like, the groundwork for conflict. We are moving toward, however slowly, some kind of confrontation with Iran. Now, that should worry everybody, but it should especially be of concern to anyone who supported the president. If President Trump decides to go to war with Iran, it will destroy his presidency, just as the Iraq War destroyed the presidency of his Republican predecessor, George W. Bush. Attacking Iran is not like intervening in Libya or Syria, or even like invading Iraq. It entails far greater risk and much higher costs. Geographically, Iran is about 4 times the size of Iraq. It has 3 times as many people as Iraq had when we invaded. Iraq was a divided country along religious lines. Iran is not. It's cohesive. It's a much richer country, too, with a military that has spent many years preparing for a U.S. invasion. It's a formidable force. In 2002, the U.S. military carried out a war game that was widely understood to be a simulation of an invasion of Iran. It went badly. America suffered more than 20,000 casualties in a single day, and officials halted the game. So the question is not, could America beat Iran? Yes, it could. The question is it ready to try? Well, less ready than ever, actually. Compared to 2003, our country is deeper in debt and far more politically divided than it's been since the Civil War. Our military is overstretched. Ask anyone in it. Meanwhile, China is much stronger than it was 15 years ago. You can bet the Chinese military will be more assertive than ever when we're tied down in yet another quagmire. Does anyone outside of Washington actually support a new war in Iran? Well, the Saudi royal family does. So do the leaders of other Sunni Gulf states. They see Iran as their greatest rival, and they'd love to have America fight a war against Iran for them. Why wouldn't they? President Trump's own supporters know better than this, though. You'll remember that back in 2016, during the Republican primary debate in South Carolina, Donald Trump was the only person on that stage to call the Iraq war a mistake. He vowed never to repeat anything like that and promised that if elected, he would act only in America's interests. Now, the morons handicapping the debate on television predicted Trump would lose. It was over. Saying that had sealed his fate. And, of course, they were wrong, and he won. Republican voters agreed with him, it turned out. They had a better sense of the truth. A lot of their kids were serving in the military. 2.5 years later, amazingly, the president's advisors are telling him he must abandon that promise. Iran is too important, they say. It's the greatest threat this country faces, despite the fact that virtually every terror attack in America has been inspired not by Iran, but by Iran's Sunni enemies. Doesn't matter. The mullahs are months away from building a nuke, the neocons tell us. Keep in mind, these people have been saying the exact same thing, word for word, for more than a decade. You can look it up on Google. They have no idea what they're talking about. Their track records are embarrassing, disaster after disaster. They ought to be selling timeshares in Maui or doing something useful. Instead, they have more political power than they've ever had. Amazingly, almost to a person, this same group bitterly opposed the president they now work for. They repeatedly attacked him in public, and they attacked him savagely in private. They consider his ideas absurd to this day. They regard the notion of putting America first as morally offensive. They are fully on Bill Kristol's team. In fact, just last week, Kristol was encouraging Nikki Haley to challenge her boss, Donald Trump, for the Republican nomination 2 years from now, in a way that makes sense. If there was ever a swamp in Washington, you are looking at it, the foreign policy establishment. They are working overtime to ensnare the president in a mess in Iran. Let's hope that he understands exactly what's going on. Douglas McGregor is a retired Army colonel, author of the book Margin of Victory, a frequent guest on the show, and he joins us tonight. Colonel McGregor, thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks, Tucker. I appreciate it.
So I can't help, since I've been in Washington for 30 years, notice that the very people who are pushing this new entanglement, this new enterprise, are the Trump administration's gravest enemies on almost every subject, and they are also the same people who predicted outcomes that never came to pass. In other words, they've been wrong again and again and again and again. How do these people still have power?
Well, look, I think President Trump lost control of the whole appointment process and staffing the government shortly after the election. I don't know the details, but he ended up appointing large numbers of people who subsequently brought in their friends, almost all of whom were opposed to Donald Trump and his agenda. But I think it's important to say something about the president's comment, because the president's right. If you look at the Iranian defense establishment, we spend more money on one Ford-class aircraft carrier than Iran spends on its entire military establishment. So if there were a war, it would be a very one-sided affair. But the problem is that wars don't work that way. They tend to move in directions that no one anticipated. Suddenly, people that you would think would otherwise avoid conflict might decide that it's not in their interest to see Iran destroyed. And I'm thinking of Russia, and I'm thinking of China as perfect examples. Why would they stand by and watch us pulverize Iran? It seems very unlikely. So I think President Trump understands that. In fact, this afternoon when he talked to the VFW, he made the comment that he pulled out of the deal with Iran, but he's open to another deal. He's open to talking, to negotiating. He's talked to the Russians, and he's talked to the North Koreans. That seems to have had a positive impact, certainly in Northeast Asia. We don't know what will happen in the future, but I think that's a good sign. So I think dealing with Donald Trump, understand that anyone who threatens the United States with this man in the White House should seek psychiatric care. They're crazy, because Donald Trump means what he says. He will fight to defend the United States. On the other hand, I don't see any evidence that he's interested in precipitating a conflict.
Do you think the advisors around him, whose comments we just played, Nikki Haley, for example, or John Bolton, I mean, they seem to come at this with pre-existing agendas.
Well, of course. But the good news is that President Trump hasn't listened very much to his advisors. If he did, we would never have made any progress on the Korean Peninsula. We would not be working with the Chinese. We would never have met with Vladimir Putin. So God bless the president. He doesn't listen to these people. So I'm not too worried about that. The thing that does worry me, though, given some of the comments that have been made, is this red meat on the table for the war lobby. You and I know that there are a lot of people who would welcome conflict with Iran. That's obvious. I think the president needs to watch carefully for the potential for something like the Gulf of Tonkin incident. Many of your viewers may not remember that. It never happened. And we could very well be treated to something like that in the Gulf. We should watch for that. And this is an example of President Trump's comments on fake news. He should not be sabotaged by fake news.
I agree. We've seen it happen twice in Syria, twice. Colonel, thank you very much. Great to see you.
Thank you, Tucker.
One activist says conservatives only want Planned Parenthood to be defunded in order to force the nation's women to get pregnant. It's a confusing argument. We're going to allow her to explain it next. Republicans ran on the promise to defund Planned Parenthood, $500 million a year of taxpayer money. Remember that? That was a 2016 election. Correctional Republicans haven't really tried hard to do that. That has not stopped the administration, though, from taking its own kind of action on the question. The administration is attempting to tweak Title X funding formulas to divert federal funds away from Planned Parenthood, the country's largest abortion provider. Sonia Osorio is the president of the New York chapter of the National Organization for Women. She says the real goal of defunding Planned Parenthood isn't to prevent taxpayers from funding something they abhor, abortion. It's to force women to get pregnant. Sonia Osorio joins us tonight. Sonia, it's great to see you. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you. Well, Tucker, if you take away the access to abortion and you take away birth control, which is a really big issue that we've got to discuss here tonight, you are indeed forcing women to have children. Now, let's get back to your point. I'm just laughing because
I wonder how many people actually, but I mean, I think most of our viewers know that what you're saying is pure lunacy and dishonest, and you do too. But let's just sort of, just for fun, reverse engineer this for a second. So who is taking away the right to have an abortion? I think the law, I don't think I know because I read it, the proposed regulation change would just make it less likely that taxpayers have to pay for abortion. Is that the same as banning abortion?
Let's be really clear, and this is something, and it's really the reason, Tucker, that I wanted to come on your show tonight, because I needed to dispel this myth. People need to understand, I want all the viewers to understand, your taxpayers do not pay for abortions in this country. Taxpayers do not pay for abortions.
They don't. They don't. But they do give $500 million to the largest
your taxpayers do pay for abortions
on the content.
In the case of rape and if a woman is dying. Those are the two situations since 1977 because of the Hyde Amendment.
Look, hold on. You're spewing propaganda here. Look, we pay taxpayers at gunpoint $500 million to Planned Parenthood, which commits more abortion than anybody else in the country. So
I don't think you should joke about.
They say it doesn't pay. I'm not joking.
You just talked about
gunpoint. What is at gunpoint? If you don't pay your taxes, they come and arrest you. The cops arrest you. So you don't pay your taxes voluntarily. You do it because the government backs it up with a threat of force.
What everybody should also understand, if you give me a moment to speak, what everybody should understand also is Planned Parenthood works just like any other medical provider. They get reimbursed for the procedures they perform that are approved by the government. So they get a reimbursement for an STD testing. They get reimbursed for all those other services they do, but not for abortion. But I want to take a moment to talk about what is happening.
But hold on, you've taken a lot of moments to talk. So let me just ask you one question, which is:
we've got 4 minutes.
You're for abortion. You think abortion is a constitutional right. I think the right to bear arms is, because I've read the Bill of Rights. Why shouldn't taxpayers be forced to subsidize the NRA or buy my guns?
Now, who is talking lunacy? And who is being dishonest?
Well, why is that crazy? You think taxpayers should pay for an abortion? You're giving me the moral lecture, but just answer my question. I think it's an interesting question.
I want viewers to know that 1 in 4 women in this country have an abortion.
You're not going to answer my question.
All kinds of women. I'm not answering your question. No, because it's a stupid question.
Why? I think it's a really interesting question. Oh, because it's causing you to enlarge your mind and it hurts. I've got an opportunity to speak to your viewers, and I'm trying to speak to them. 1 in 4 women have an abortion in this country. Yeah, no.
That has gone down.
I think I get to answer the question, Sonia.
It's gone down from 1 in 3. The reason why it's gone down is because we've had teen pregnancy prevention programs that have been successful.
No, but that,
and right now the Trump
administration
Let me ask you a question. Wants to divert $250 million.
This is why I never like to talk to the abortion people, because they just shout.
Pregnancy programs.
Don't make me cut you off, please.
They want to divert that to abstinence-only education.
All right, Sonia, I tried. It was a good faith effort. I really tried. I hate cutting people off, but you were just too obnoxious. I'm sorry. Right here on the show, we warned you that the FAA was putting the country at risk in the way that they were hiring air traffic controllers. Now they claim they have changed. We have an update to our exclusive investigation, and that's next. In an exclusive investigation by this program, we warned you about the war on standards underway at the FAA. In the name of diversity, federal officials devalued a skills-based test for hiring, oh, no big deal, air traffic controllers, and instead implemented a biographical questionnaire whose purpose was not hiring skilled controllers. In fact, the more skills you had, the fewer points you got, perversely. But instead, the point was ensuring the hiring of people who were of the right race. It was insane, of course, dangerous, yes, and it sparked a major reaction. Now the Department of Transportation says it is ready to revise those policies in the name of public safety. Stephen Bradbury is the General Counsel of the Department of Transportation, and he joins us tonight. Mr. Bradbury, thanks for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me on, Tucker.
So it was a pretty simple story, and I think the fix is pretty simple. Can you assure our viewers that air traffic controllers will be hired solely on the basis of relevant criteria? In other words, how good they are at air traffic controlling, and not on the basis of irrelevant criteria like their appearance?
That's right. We're making a change to no longer use that biographical assessment that the FAA has used since 2014 and that you featured on your show. I will point out that the version focus exclusively on aptitude, competence for being an excellent air traffic controller. And so we're clearing the decks, and what we're doing and what I'm announcing on your show tonight is that the FAA is no longer going to use the biographical assessment in any form, and instead is going to give all applicants for these entry-level positions the aptitude test, which is the air traffic skills assessment test, which just tests for aptitude for the characteristics of being an excellent air traffic controller. And that test is validated, it's been standardized, it's proctored test, and it's the same test that applicants take who are graduates of the Collegiate Training Initiative schools and who apply for the academy to be air traffic control trainees. And I think it's important, Tucker, to point out that what we're talking about is the incoming candidates for the academy where they get trained like a boot camp for air traffic control duties. These are not people who are hired and put on the job in control towers to be air traffic controllers. They have to go through very rigorous training at the academy, and many of them wash out. Sometimes more than half wash out. It's rigorous. They also go. Let me just say, they go through 2 to 3 years of on-the-job training as well before they can be certified as professional air traffic controllers. So I think
but look, the bottom line is, hold on, wait, I'm sorry. Before we did the segment, this was still going on. So, I mean, before you take too much credit, I'm glad you made the change, but this was still going on.
A change
until we shined a light on it.
Listen, I do give you an assist for helping us focus on this issue. And,
helping you focus on it. All right. Well, I'm glad you did, but I mean, I just want to be clear about that. I think you needed some light shine on it. So, Stephen, thank you very much.
I will.
Okay. So we're out of time. Democratic mayoral candidate in Chicago trying to muster votes the old-fashioned way by handing out money in church. Details ahead.